So it's been a little while since we've done this shir, so we're going to get kind of a fresh start and hopefully be able to tie in some of the concepts that we've discussed in previous shirim. A little note about long gaps in shirim due to circumstances in the world. When Elazar Mordechai Koenig Zal was building up the Breslau community in Tsfat, he was in correspondence with his father, who began the community, Reb Gedalia Aharon Zal, and in many correspondences between them, his father reminded him that all of the obstacles he was encountering in his construction of the community, and all the buildings that they needed, and all the resources that they needed to have a community, were signs that the undertaking that he was involved with was extremely worthwhile and extremely positive. And if not, then the Yetzer Hara would not try so hard to stop him. Now, of course, that doesn't mean anything difficult is good. It has to be a kosher undertaking. We learn Shulchan Aruch every day so that we know what's kosher, and also so that we remove dilemmas from our hearts that would cause us to question our undertaking. Is this kosher or not? I won't try so hard if I have a doubt about it. So if I clarify that point with the Shulchan Aruch, with the daily learning of the Shulchan Aruch, and an in-depth learning when needed, then we can go about things with full intention and full energy, which is needed to defeat the Yetzer Hara. As we've discussed in the shirim in the first Likutei Moharan, a person has to constantly be bothering their Yetzer Toiv to get it to work hard, because it's comfortable just being good and knowing that it's good in its heart. And the Yetzer Hara knows it isn't good, and certainly it doesn't know that it's good, so it has to make a strong effort. So if we're going to overcome the Yetzer Hara, we have to enlist the Yetzer Toiv to make a strong effort, specifically. So continuing in Likutei Moharan base, Sif Hey. V'ikar shel hamachshavos zaros heim al yedei kilkul hamishpat. There is a substance called Mishpat that prevents machshavos zaros from entering our mind, prevents undesirable thoughts from entering our mind. And undesirable could refer to a range of things. It could be things that are just not kosher, just things that are not moral. But these thoughts, we already sort of know to push these thoughts away. It could also refer to thoughts that are simply not relevant to what we're trying to accomplish, and would only serve to redirect our energy from what we're trying to accomplish in any given moment. We know from Likutei Moharan 1 that the Yetzer Hara will try to disguise itself as mitzvahs. But we have a halacha that someone who is involved in a mitzvah does not need to stop doing that mitzvah to go do another mitzvah, because there's a lot of opportunities for mitzvahs, Baruch Hashem. And if we were to constantly be like, over there, over there, over there, well, it would be hard for us to accomplish any particular thing that we're involved with. So it's an important halacha. And the thing that defends our minds from undesirable thoughts or unproductive thoughts, even if they seem good superficially, is this attribute called Mishpat. Rabbi Nachman continues, Ki ha-mishpat hu b'chinas einayin. The Mishpat, this attribute, corresponds to the eyes. If our eyes are working properly, we're going to go in the right direction. What is the primary function of our eyes? It's that we go in the right direction. It's good if we can avoid stumbling on obstacles on the road and avoid walking into things. But also, we have to be walking in the correct direction. Someone could not trip over anything and not walk into anything and wind up at completely the wrong destination if their eyes are not properly attuned. And the proper tuning of the eyes requires a lot of information to be included in the eyes, as Ras Hashem we will discuss in this teaching. If someone simply looks at the path that's ahead of them, they will know to walk in a straight line and to avoid obstacles, but that won't save them from winding up at the wrong location. Someone also needs to have a map. They need to know where they're going. They have to be able to read the map. And the purpose of the map is not that we're staring at the map the whole time, because if we're staring at the map the whole time, then we're going to walk into things. So we have to put the information on the map in our minds. So to speak, that we have two sets of eyes. We have our physical eyes and we have our mind's eye. And our physical eye prevents us from being harmed by physical obstacles, like walking into things. And our mind's eye prevents us from stumbling over spiritual obstacles, like winding up in the wrong direction. Again, there's two levels here. This could be a completely non-kosher direction, which hopefully most of us are able to intuitively avoid. And also the direction that is not going to be the best for us, which is a little bit more difficult of a calculation to make. It's a calculation that requires more input and more wisdom and more information. And the thing that protects this wisdom and keeps it in our mind and keeps it from being overtaken by incorrect ideas or just ideas that are not relevant, that are incorrect subjectively, this attribute is Mishpat. Kamoisha Kasuv. Rabbi Nachman brings a verse, but he doesn't bring the entire verse. He brings part of the verse. And we're going to look at the context of the verse and try to figure out why Rabbi Nachman only included part of the verse, only the part that he did. Vayevoyu el ein mishpat. And they went to Ein Mishpat, a place seemingly called Ein Mishpat, the eye of Mishpat. According to what we've said just so far in the past moment, this could be the mind's eye, not to be limited by the physical eyes, but to have a spiritual eye also to guide us in a more general sense in the right direction, in a more overarching sense in the right direction. So we see on a simple level that Rabbi Nachman is establishing a connection between the eyes and Mishpat by bringing a verse from the Torah. This is a common method of verifying our connections that we make. If we can see an explicit connection between two concepts in the wording of the Torah, we can verify a concept in this way. If we have a certain direction in life that we're considering going, we can engage in the daily learning of the Shulchan Aruch and the in-depth learning when needed, and we can determine the kashrus and the prudence of this way of thinking and this idea that we've got. However, Rabbi Nachman does not include the whole verse, and he actually starts the verse on the second word. So let's take a look at the verse itself and see perhaps why did Rabbi Nachman leave out the first word. So the original context of the verse, Mikra Zeh Ne'amar B'Mechamas Arba Malachim Esachimisha, when Avraham Avinu was involved with a war between 4 kings versus 5 kings. Kedichsiv B'Bereshis, as it's written in the book of Bereshis. V'yeshuvu v'yevoyu el ein mishpat, ki kadesh, v'yaku es kol sedei ha'emeleki, v'gam es ha'emori ha'yeshev v'chat soin tamar. So, in the verse it says v'yeshuvu first, and only after that does it say v'yevoyu. V'yeshuvu, that they return, and v'yevoyu, and they go to ein mishpat. Seemingly we have a question on the verse. Well, what's really the difference here? Why does it need to say both words? So the two words are connected by the letter vav, meaning and. Vayeshuvu, vayevoyu. And there are many different techniques for analyzing why two words are connected with the letter vav. But here we'll look at 2 of them. One is to say that the letter vav is inclusive. Vayeshuvu, that's an important thing, and vayevoyu also is an important thing, and that the two rely on each other. So what is the implication of these 2 words? Vayeshuvu implies that you've been there before, and you're going back to a place that you've already been to. And vayevoyu doesn't necessitate that you've already been to this place before. There's a difference between returning and going, which is essentially novelty, or at least the possibility of novelty. And if we interpret the connection between the 2 words according to vav, meaning that they are mutually inclusive and mutually reliant, then we have to say that if I'm going to go to somewhere in a full-hearted way, it has to be a place that I am somewhat familiar with. It has to be a place that I've been to before. If I have a certain way I want to go in life, a certain way I want to develop myself as a person, one could say, well, you have everything you need, it just perhaps is sort of jumbled around. Rabbi Nachman says that this quality of Mishpat is meant to protect us from machshav zaris, from unwanted thoughts and unwanted ideas. And one could perhaps say that the reason that I have any such ideas is simply because the all good attributes within me are not quite in the right places. It's like there's an old joke that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit and wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So tomatoes are good and fruit salad is good, and the only problem is the way that they're combined. In halakha, we know that it's perfectly fine to eat dairy products according to Judaism, and it's perfectly fine to eat meat products, but one should not mix the two. It's simply the mixing that's the problem. There's a passage in the Likutei Moharan where it asks, what really makes something bad? Is it that a particular thing is bad? In Judaism, do we say that pork is bad? It isn't that it's bad. It isn't that it's evil. It's simply that it shouldn't be mixed with certain things. Like, for example, Jews are not supposed to eat pork. That doesn't mean that it's bad inherently. It just means that a Jew eating pork, well, that's a problem because of the mixture of the two things. So improper mixtures are how the Zohar there defines bad. So this is one possibility how we can analyze this phrase. But there's a little bit of an issue here, which is that I can only ever go to a place that I've been before. We discussed previously in this teaching that Mashiach, the great Savior of the world, has a different modality of prayer than what we're accustomed to. The typical sort of prayer that we do is called Avodas HaBerurim, the work of purifying the sparks of holiness that are fallen into the world, that are already there, and sort of shifting around things so that the resources and the plenty in the world goes to people who are going to do good things with it, not the people who are going to do bad things with it. But this isn't going to create a permanent change because this dynamic can shift again. Why did the sparks fall in the first place? What was it about the construct of where the sparks were that they fell in the first place? So the thing is, if we just send the sparks back to their sources, well, they could fall again. So we want a permanent solution. We're discussing here the idea of Mashiach, and the novelty of Mashiach over all other great people is that Mashiach creates a change that lasts forever, a positive change that never goes back. And so there must be something about it that inherently cannot go back. Whatever the weakness is in the way that the sparks were in heaven, that they fell, something new needs to come to rectify this structure. So Rabbi Nachman does not include the word v'yeshuvu, return, in the Likutei Moharan. He starts from the word voyavoyu. And so this brings us to another way of analyzing the letter Vav that connects the two words. We can say that Vav is exclusive. We can read it like this. Vayeshuvu, and they returned. But that wasn't enough. Vayavoyu. And they did this additional thing that is not already included in Vayeshuvu. It is not already included in sort of recombining the parts so that they'll just be in the proper arrangement. But the Vayavoyu is something new, that they were going in a new direction. And this connects with the idea that we're supposed to be learning in this teaching of the Likutei Moharan how to utilize the abilities of prayer that Mashiach utilizes in order to bring a novel light into the world. So, what is it about the prayer that is different? What is it about the eyes in particular that gives us this attribute of Mishpat that allows us to When Rabbi Nachman quotes the verse, he says v'yevoyu, which we can mean to say to go to somewhere new. It seems to be that Rabbi Nachman prefers, for the sake of this teaching, the way of analyzing the vav that it means exclusive, that it means that yeshuvu, that isn't enough. V'yevoyu, we need to bring something new. So v'yevoyu, we can translate here as to bring something new, to the ein mishpat, to this place that we will protect it, to this storehouse that is not affected by machshavei zaros and wrong ideas. When we reassemble something, it's never quite as good as the first time around. If we take a piece of electronics apart, and unless we're completely a master at electronics, and then we put it back together, well, for most of us who aren't electricians, how has that gone? It isn't quite as strong the second time around. There's an idea of totaling, like someone can total their car, which means that whatever it would cost to fix the car, at this point it isn't worth it. It would be better just to get a new car. And that there's only so many times that we can patch it back together and it's still going to be worth doing before we need to just bring something brand new. So how do we introduce this novelty? How do we bring this novelty within the shield of Mishpat? Rabbi Nachman continues with another verse. V'zeh bechinas ein Yakov. So we see that there's something special about Yakov Avinu, out of all the forefathers, that gives us the ability to not only recombine the parts in a good way, but to bring something new that will hold the parts together in a way that they won't ever fall apart again. And it's known that Yakov is associated with the attribute of Tiferes. He has the attribute of, we could say it means balance, Tiferes, but we're going to encounter an issue with that definition in a moment. So ein Yaakov, why is this particular to Yaakov? Avraham, his grandfather, was associated with the attribute of Chesed, and his father Yitzchak associated with the attribute of Din, with the attributes of kindness and stringency, obviously both of which are important. It's important to be willing to invest our energies into the right places, but also not to invest them into the wrong places. So this corresponds to Avraham and to Yitzchak. But Yaakov is this attribute of balance, and we've discussed in a previous lesson a teaching from the Alshech Academy, one of the great Kabbalists. And the Shlah says that in the lower three worlds, you could just say in the lower world for now, the lower worlds are encloaked in falsehood. This is part of what makes our work in the world difficult, is identifying the right directions. And a particular source of this falsehood is the idea that all things come into existence in a top-down sort of way. It says there that all things come into existence from the attribute of Chachma. So there's, of course, 10 attributes in any given thing, according to the Kabbalah. And Chachma is, in many cases, the first one. And let's say that Chachma contains within it already the 10 attributes that will come from it. And when the light goes from Chachma to Bina, it leaves behind the essential nature of Chachma, and it forms its own attribute. And then the remaining 9 are all contained within Bina, and then from Bina it continues on to Das or to Chesed, depending on where in the tree of life you're talking about in particular. But it goes on to the next attribute is the point, leaving behind the essential attribute of Bina to be sort of its own thing. And now the remaining 8 attributes are contained within the following attribute, be that Das or be that Chachma, or be that Das or be that Chesed. And this phenomena continues until all 10 attributes are sort of trickled down. The idea of the trickle-down economy. That if we give everything to the very top level, then they're going to create jobs for the next level down, and so on and so forth, until finally at the very bottom level, people are doing things like giving charity. Maybe one could think that charity is only something for the bottom level, but in this teaching in the Likutei Moharan, he teaches us a concept about charity that isn't only relevant to the lowest possible levels. So the Alshech Academy says that this is only how it appears to be. But actually, in the world of Atzilus, everything comes in a center-out sort of way. So this meaning that everything begins from the attribute of Tiferes, which is right in the middle. And there's a fundamental difference between the lower worlds and the upper world with regard to how we regard this attribute of balance of Tiferes. That in the lower worlds, it seems that Tiferes is nothing other than a combination of Chesed and Gevurah. That if you were to take away the Chesed or you were to take away the Gevurah, you would no longer have Tiferes, and therefore Tiferes has nothing of its own. But that is only how it appears to be in the lower worlds. In the upper worlds, the attributes of Chesed and Gevurah actually come out of Tiferes, and the practical difference here is to say that Tiferes is an attribute in and of itself. And Tiferes is an attribute that is capable of generating novelty. Chesed and Gevurah are both higher than Tiferes in the Sephirotic tree, in the tree of life. And so one could think that Tiferes has no ability to generate a new Chesed and a new Gevurah, to actually increase our abilities in devoting our energies and giving over in Chesed, and it doesn't have any ability to increase our abilities in eliminating bad choices and setting ourselves specifically on the right choices associated with the attribute of Gevurah, that it simply sort of arranges them in a good way. And that's how, if you were to translate it as balance. But if you translate it rather as source and you set aside for a moment this idea that higher is better, it's a great principle in Breslov that although it seems that higher is better, really the right path, the right fit is actually better. A simple example we could use is to look at the radio dial and to think that, well, if we turn the radio dial to a higher number, that doesn't make it better music. Right? You have to turn it to the right number, specifically the right number, and that's what makes it better music. And so if we think of Yakov, if we think of Tiferes as something that actually can generate a new Chesed and generate a new Gevurah, now we're actually able to increase our abilities in these areas. Now, we've said all this so far in sort of an abstract way, where we associate Mishpat with this attribute that it is not only a place where we sort of store our good attributes, but it is actually a place that generates good attributes. There is a place that we can go, that if we want new good attributes, that we can go to this place and increase in our ability, increase our Yetzer Tov's ability to overcome the Yetzer Hara, because the Yetzer Hara works very hard. We talked about in the first Likutei Moharan that let's entertain for a moment this idea that prayer actually works, and if that's so, well, it says in the Gemara that a thief prays. A thief, he knows that what he's doing isn't right, and so he can't rely on his own merits. There's no way, so he prays that he'll be successful. So you see that bad people do pray. And people, at least who are doing bad things, do pray. And so if we say that prayer works, there's a huge ramification, which is that good people need to pray, and they need to pray more. A good person has a little bit of a disadvantage, which is that they understand that what they are doing is good, and therefore they think they can rely on their own goodness, and that will give them enough power to succeed against the Yetzer Hara. But the Yetzer Hara is trying very hard. So good people need to out-pray people who are doing not good things. So we need to have a source of energy that is sufficient for this endeavor, and it cannot be simply a storehouse. So we've discussed in previous teachings in this Likutei Moharan the effect that the positive and the negative mitzvahs have on our prayer. So first, a person can just go to pray, and they take with whatever they've got now, nothing new necessarily, and they say the words of the prayer, and hopefully they have a feeling in their heart concerning the contents of the words, and hopefully they feel that they're actually talking directly to God Almighty. And so this is good. But what are they doing the rest of the time? Because a person has what they bring consciously to a situation, They have what I'm going to intend during my prayers consciously. But they also bring with them their subconscious. They also bring with them who they are the rest of the time. And there's a verse that says that Hashem is Chayfis Kal Chadrei Vaden. Hashem searches all of our inner places, and He sees everything. He sees not only what our mouths say, not only what the outer part of our heart that we can sort of actively modulate, and I'm going to feel a certain way in the outside part of the heart, but that Kol Chadrei Vaden, all of the places inside of us, including the deep ones, that we don't have as much of a conscious control over. But this is the novelty of this teaching in the Likutei Moharan, that we do in fact have conscious control over the inner part of our heart. But how does that work? How do we exercise that conscious control? And so this is the purpose of the Mitzvos lo yisaiseh, that we want to have all of our excitement go to the right places. Let's say, for the purpose of this idea, that prayer is a good place to bring our excitedness to bring our energy to. But then we go out and we hear something about politics, or we hear something about sports, or someone cuts us off in traffic, and we get emotional. And so one could say that it isn't so much of a problem to be emotional about things that aren't as important, that where being emotional doesn't actually help in a direct way. You could say being cut off in traffic, one should stay calm there and just drive well. But maybe politics, one could argue that, well, I had ought to feel a certain emotion about this thing because it's going to affect the world in a very tangible way, who gets this particular position in office or which legislature is passed or something like that. But as far as our actual impact on the situation goes, we have to analyze in a real way, is my sitting here having an emotional reaction behind the computer screen, is that actually helping me accomplish anything? Or maybe I need to sit down and write a letter with a yeshuv hadas, with a clear mind, so I can really say what I want to say in a good way when I write a letter to my senator, or whatever action I want to undertake to affect whatever thing in the world I want to actually really affect and actually overcome the Yetzer Hara, and not just feel a certain way. Yetzer Tov is comfortable feeling good if we don't bother it. So if I sit here and feel I have the right emotional reaction about this thing, and therefore that's good, well, the Yetzer Tov isn't getting out of bed for that one. One can lie there in bed behind the computer screen and feel. The Yetzer Hara is out working hard, so we have to overcome it. So when we feel a strong emotion about something that isn't important, something else happens, which is that it is depleting our emotional energy that we could then direct to prayer, to something that will actually give us power directly. Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Moharan that someone that prays with power receives power. And power in different attributes. I teach some guys that have a hard time with getting sleepy while they're learning, and anybody that's studied things in depth knows that it burns a lot of calories in the brain to learn things in depth, and it can be tiring. So Rabbi Nachman teaches that when we pray, and prayer is included in learning with power, it gives us power back. And so a simple piece of advice to these folks is to read with a big, strong voice. It literally gives you energy to do that. And also to bring our full emotional self, not depleted by other situations that really actually warrant calmness as far as being effective. In prayer, it's the opposite. In prayer, bringing a full emotional energy is going to give us fresh emotional energy, and just fresh energy in general that we can then use to outrun and outwork the Yetzer Hara. So this is essentially the purpose that we've discussed so far of the Mitzvos lo yisaiseh. One purpose that we can say for the sake of enhancing our abilities in prayer and making our prayer more like the prayers of Mashiach. Rabbi Nachman describes the prayers of Mashiach as being physical and also as being hidden. This is alluded to in Zohar. It says that the prayers of Mashiach are connected to the nose. And we discussed the nose, that the nose is sort of both external and internal in a very clear way. It's the first thing you see. If somebody says something blatantly obvious, you say it's on the nose. The first part of your body that precedes you anywhere you walk is probably your nose. You can, before you know what something is in your head, before you've read the details, you can smell it. So the nose is a very external thing. And at the same time, it is a very internal thing. Because what's behind those nostrils? It's sort of a world in there. When we have a stuffy nose, we become aware of it, but unless you're a doctor, you probably don't know what's causing it in there. You can't, even if you shine a flashlight, you can't see deep into the cavities. It's a very mysterious place, in fact, the nose, which is ironic considering that it's on the very front of our body and it's like on the nose. It's like the foremost thing. And so we explain that if this is connected with the prayers of Mashiach, then the prayers of Mashiach need to have these two attributes to them, that there is a hidden quality and there is a physical, obvious quality. And the hidden quality is that it is enhanced by the mitzvahs lo yisaysim, which involve not doing something. You cannot see the not doing of something. It's secret. And at the same time, the not doing of something involves the entire body. One can say with a mitzvah saseh that when I'm putting on tefillin, I'm putting them on my arm and my head. These are essentially the two body parts that are involved. Now, with great intention, I can see how the other body parts are all involved, but to basically be mikayim the mitzvah, to basically fulfill the mitzvah, I simply have to put them on my arm and put them on my head, and I recite a blessing with my mouth. And if the heart is included in that, that's great, but if I just say the blessing with my mouth still, and I've fulfilled the mitzvah. But mitzvahs lo yisaysim, we discussed before that a Jew is not permitted to eat certain things. This is a mitzvahs lo yisaysim. When someone eats something, this affects every limb of their body. The contents of what they eat goes into the blood, which goes to the whole body. And even if I involve my heart in my words of prayer or in my recitation of the blessing on the tefillin, it doesn't necessarily affect my blood. When we say heart here, we're talking sort of our emotional center. But the physical blood, it isn't in a physical way. The blood simply sort of moves through the heart. So what is it that puts the content into the blood? That happens in digestion. So when we're not allowed to eat certain things, this affects our entire body. So the mitzvahs lo yisaysim, by having this physical and yet very concealed attribute to them, they allow us to preserve our full emotional power, that we can use it in prayer. We can invest it in a good place that will actually give us energy in return, as opposed to being like emotionally draining, like not so helpful things that we could potentially direct our emotional energy toward if we don't utilize this power. The mitzvahs aseh help us maintain a schedule. The Yetzer Hara wants us to... So once the Yetzer Hara knows that we're putting our emotional energy into prayer and not into things that don't warrant it, not into things where it won't help, the Yetzer Hara has a very simple job, which is to shift our schedule a little bit, which is to make that by the time we reach the end of the prayer, we no longer are quite so emotional, and therefore the Yetzer Hara has a little bit of emotional energy left to misdirect and sort of start the negative feedback loop again. We could also say that the Yetzer Hara might tell us, well, we need to warm up a little bit in our prayers and start without so much energy, and only then we can bring energy later, because then the Yetzer Hara has a little bit of energy at the beginning of our prayers that it took, that then it can use later to sort of start the negative feedback loop again. But it's in the Shulchan Aruch, which we're supposed to be reading every day. It says that Aleinu, the prayer that is at the end, or at least very close to the end of the davening, depending on which version of the prayers you use, is supposed to be recited with great energy and with great fear of Hashem, a very palpable feeling. It should be a very strong prayer in particular. And so the beginning and end of our prayer need to be very strong. And prayer has a certain time that we're supposed to do it, according to the Shulchan Aruch. And that's sort of an interesting thing to look at, because prayer is seemingly sort of a thing that is above time. Why is it that if I'm talking to an eternal being, I have to do it before 4 hours of the day have passed? What's the connection? So, mitzvahs aseh give us a schedule. And this schedule protects us from the Yetzer Hara that wants to shift the timing a little bit. We know that we should direct our emotional energy to good places. And if we're doing that, we're sort of moving the parts around like how they're supposed to be. And so, but the Yetzer Hara still has what to do, which is to shift our schedule slightly. And so this combination of the mitzvahs aseh, which protect us from the schedule shifting attribute of the Yetzer Hara, and the mitzvahs lo aseh, which allow us to direct our emotional energy into the right places and to invest them into profitable investments from an emotional energy sort of standpoint. These form a third thing. We learned earlier that these form a thing called Mishpat, which is Mishpat Amuda the Emsa Isa. It's right in the middle, and we know from the Shlah that therefore it is the source of. And once we are fulfilling the mitzvahs loisai and the mitzvahs aseh, we can be aware that there is this new thing here, this thing called Mishpat, that is going to generate for me the ability to utilize my emotional energies in the right place and to maintain this with the discipline of a good schedule. And so we see from Yakov that one difference in the storyline between Yakov and his forefathers is that one, he had a lot more children. Both of his fathers, at least the children who made their way into the main part of the story of the Chumash, Avraham had 2 children. Later in his life, he had more children, but the children who were discussed at the most length are his 2 children. And Yitzchak also had 2 children, and Yaakov had 12. This is a huge difference. This is a categorical difference in the number of children that they have. So we see that Yakov had a much greater amount of energy that he was able to use to produce. Where is he getting that energy? Where is this amazing chiddush that somehow he has 10 more children than either of his fathers had? Where is he getting this energy to do this from? We see another difference, that Avraham and Yitzchak both are, it is mentioned in the Talmud that both of them had a son that was good and a son that was troubled. By comparison with Yaakov, he had 12 children who were perfect, 12 children who were tzaddikim. And so we have to say that Yaakov had something completely new. And we're going to look a little bit further into this detail about the ayin Yaakov, the ayin Yaakov, the ayin of Yaakov, the eye of Yaakov. What was special about the eye of Yaakov? So in the concept of eyes, there's another teaching in the Likutei Moharan that says like this: Ha'inayim heim kemari letusha. The eye kemara letusha. The eyes are like a clear mirror. Shenisra'a bahem kol davar she'oimed kenegdoi. That all things that stand before the eyes are seen within the eyes. He doesn't say here that the eyes see all the things around, but that things are seen within the eye. So the difference is, if the eye is passive, if the eye simply receives input from other things and it doesn't actually have any influence of its own, or that the eye is the place where we determine what things actually are, that the identity of the thing before us it isn't only analyzed by the eye, but it is actually determined by the eye. That we can have this kavanah when we look at things, this intention when we look at things, that we have an attribute called mishpat. And this mishpat can generate novelty. Not simply do I have the right idea about the thing before me or not, but what idea can I assert onto the thing that is before me? We have an excellent example of this concept from the writings of Reb Nassan Zal, the primary student of Rabbeinu Zal of Rabbi Nachman, in the Likutei Halachos, that he takes a principle from the Likutei Moharan and he applies it to the teachings of the Shulchan Aruch, to the laws that are given in the Shulchan Aruch. And besides for being an excellent explanation of Likutei Moharan and also of the principles, the spiritual principles that are connected with the laws in the Shulchan Aruch, this is also an example to us that what we are to do with this new information that we obtain from the Likutei Moharan or from any holy source. which is that we can take a concept and we can put it on top, we can use it as a matrix by which to see and analyze everything that is before us and take an active role in seeing in this way. There's another statement about the eye here from the book Kehilas Yakov, a Hasidic explanation of Kabbalah. It says, Ayin hu chachma sheyesh ba sheva gavanim k'moi ba'ayin. That the eye is this attribute of wisdom, and it has within it 7 colors. It has within it all the other attributes. Mishpat, ein mishpat, has within it all the other attributes. Meaning to say, I don't have to take the chesed that's already there. Maybe I should be aware of what it is so I know what's novel and what isn't, but I don't have to take just the chesed that's already there and shuffle around the parts and then they just fall apart again after I'm done praying. And I don't have to take the gevura that's already there that I can put in the right place, but it may naturally kind of slip back into the wrong place. Just like if the sparks fell in the first place, then we need to figure out how we can put them together again in a way that they don't fall. But with the ein mishpat, I can generate a new chesed and a new gevura that will, they aren't totaled. They're going to hold up, and I can put the parts together in this way that won't fall apart again on account of the novelty. That is the something new that comes to repair the initial state of the sparks that they fell in the first place. And so when we learned before that because of Mashiach's unique degree of discipline with regard to his emotional energies and keeping the schedule of the emotional energies, that Mashiach is able to bring novelty into the world with his prayers, not just the shuffling around of the parts. We didn't quite understand what novelty is. But here we see that every attribute can be generated anew, and this will provide us with new power, and specifically power that the Yetzer Hara will be overcome by the Yetzer Tov. And not simply that the Yetzer Tov sits there immortal behind its computer screen feeling the right emotion, but that the Yetzer Tov actually has new powers that the Yetzer Hara has never heard of before because they're brand new. And therefore it can overcome the Yetzer Hara.
Beautiful. Chazak Baruch.